am delighted to introduce my friend Thomas Steenburg. He is one of the best-known Canadian Sasquatch researchers and is an active field investigator and author. He has researched hundreds of sightings and discovered over 100 tracks at the Chilliwack River. You can see one of his casts over at the Lacey Museum. The British Columbia resident has spent nearly 40 years investigating sightings in his lifelong search for evidence to prove Sasquatch's existence. He also devotes much effort to debunking false reports and hoaxes. His 3 books are The Sasquatch in Alberta, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, The Continuing Mystery, and In Search of Giants. He has also co-authored Meet the Sasquatch with fellow Canadian Bigfooter Christopher Murphy. Please join me in welcoming Thomas Steenburg.
Thank you, everybody. Is this mic system working? Yeah. Okay, good. Thomas Steenburg, the title of my presentation is The Sasquatch in British Columbia. As you heard in the introduction, I have spent since 1978 researching and trying to prove the existence of whether or not we share the North American continent with a large hair-covered bipedal primate. Still trying to figure that out. All right. As a researcher, and I just say to anyone who wants to start getting involved in this kind of research into this, there's one golden rule. Thou shalt not hoax. Not ever, ever, even for a joke. Thou shalt not hoax. Because if you get caught, your integrity's gone, and you'll never be taken seriously again. Because believe me, in the Sasquatch field, we don't forget. And we always remember, all right? Sasquatch in BC, Ambrose Point Mask. As we all know, First Nations have had stories of the Sasquatch going along long before the Europeans ever came to the North American continent. Ambrose Point was a member of the CHEHALIS band, or CHEHALIS as they like to be called, which is in the Harrison Lake, Harrison River area. He made this mask and it was used in their ceremonial dances and stuff about the Sasquatch in around 1920s and 1930s. A man named J.W.BURNS, who was a Caucasian man who was on the reserve as an Indian agent. To put it very politely, he was a spy for the Crown. But he was very, very popular with the people there and got very friendly with them, and they started telling him their stories, okay? Ambrose Point gave this mask to Peter Byrne because the men were good friends. And J.W.BURNS, or did I say Peter Byrne? No, J.W.BURNS kept it most of his life and displayed it in his home, and he decided to donate it to the Vancouver Museum so the public could always see it. They really never displayed it. They kept it in storage somewhere. They brought it out for us a few times, and when we had displays going on about the Sasquatch, including this travel exhibit when it was there. But they basically kept it locked away. But fortunately, recently, not too long ago, it was given back to CHEHALIS people, and they now proudly display it in the council chambers, and they still use it for their mask and their ceremonies, and the public can still see it today. The Sonnequa, you always know, better translation, loosely translated, the wild woman of the woods. You always know the Sonnequa in First Nation and oral history tradition because she always has whistling lips, all right? That's from the story pole outside the Museum of Victoria, British Columbia. It's been there forever. And it portrays the Sonnequa. The Bukwas. Some say the Bukwas is the male, the Sonnequa is the female. But from the Klaklakewak First Nation tribe on the upper coast of Vancouver Island and the islands in the mainland, they call it the Bukwas. And it's kind of funny. You'll see it written down as the Quaddle First Nation, but we learned the hard way. It's actually Klaklakewak. And I had to go over that a dozen times before I got that right. But as you can see, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of First Nations, different names for them, different beliefs about them, different stories about their origins, but they're all basically talking about the same thing, okay? All of them. Large, hair-covered, walks like a man, rather ape-like in appearance. Some of them have different beliefs about what they're capable of, different stories, what their origins are. But, you know, it all basically translates into the same thing. You got certain First Nations oral traditions like the Thunderbird that some of them have heard of, but others have not, right? The mighty mountain lizard, which is just kind of like a dinosaur-like thing that the CHEHALIS have never heard of, but on what was the Queen Charlotte Islands and the Haida Gwaii, it's part of their nation, but they don't share them. But for some reason, what we call today the Sasquatch, or as the case here, the Bookwas, or Sonequa, or Oma, or Skookum, or the various other dozens of names that go all up and down the coast, they all have heard of it, and they all basically describe the same thing. And of course, in Sasquatch lore and in the history of this and the stories, we have what we call our classic tales. Tales you've read about in old books, tales you've a dozen times. You have them here in Washington, the Fred Beck story, the story of Ape Canyon, Mount St. Helens. This is the CHAPMAN house in the Ruby Creek region of British Columbia, 1941. Miss Jenny Chapman says she was doing her dishes. Two of her children, she had three, came running in the house saying, "Mommy, Mommy, there's a strange cow coming out of the woods." She looked out. She didn't see a strange cow coming out of the woods. She saw what she described as a large, hair-covered, gorilla-like thing, rather man-like in the way it walked, coming towards the house, and she was absolutely terrified. She covered the kids with a blanket, went out the back door, down to the banks of the Fraser River, went through the local cemetery, back towards the railroad tracks, and fled. Mr. George Chapman, who returned later on, was a little upset finding his family gone, the door swinging open, and all these huge footprints going across the field towards his house. Seemed to circle the house, actually at one point seemed to enter the house. Then it went into a lean-to, which is the remains of, you see right there, that used to be beside the house. Opened a barrel of salted salmon. They assumed sampled it, didn't like what it tasted, and dumped the contents out all over the place. So there are little pieces of salted salmon all over. Then the track sort of went off to the river's edge and then turned around, went back across the field, crossed the CPR fence, and back up to the mountains. Now, a man named Tiffany, who was working on a railway yard on the railway line back in those days, him and two other men were just doing their job when all of a sudden Mrs. Chapman came running around the bend of the railway with her kids saying, "Help me, help me, the Sasquatch is after me." So they went and investigated, and they went to the house. It's known as the Chapman incident, and it's one of the classic tales. And the story is, if you read about it in most of the older books on this, is the Chapmans abandoned the house after this happened and never went back. Well, that's not entirely true. They stayed another week, but something kept coming back. Because at 2 o'clock, between 2 and 3 in the morning, their dogs would go crazy and they would hear this clicking type noise and barking type noise outside, but they never actually saw it again. Also, Mrs. Chapman said it was rather a yellowish teak color. Very dark skin in the face, but the hair was rather a teak color, kind of similar to the door. She just said it was like a boat oar color. And there were local stories at the time of a Sasquatch seen in the area that had the nickname Big Blondie. So I think it's a possibility that they saw this very animal. All right? That's the house. The house was eventually abandoned after a week, but not totally, because other relatives of the Chapmans continued to occupy the house. And what really caused it to be abandoned was the last great flood of the Fraser River in 1948, when this whole property was about 5 feet underwater. It was right on the river's edge. Even half the graves in the local cemetery were disinterred and went floating downstream. It was a real mess. Yeah. We haven't had a flood in the Fraser River like that since. And since then, they've increased the dikes. But that's what basically caused the house to be abandoned and was left to the elements. This picture was taken by the late René de Hinden in the early 1960s when the house was still standing. You can't find any trace of it today. That's what the property looks like today, all right? Those are the two big trees there where the house was standing. The property now belongs to a friend of mine named Schneider. Very nice gentleman. If anyone ever wants to visit this site of a classic tale, just let me know. I'll give him a call and we'll take you down to have a look. He's always willing to let people. We know these are the same two trees. There's Mr. Schneider there on his property. Because this picture taken by John Green in 1957 of the house when it was still there, and there are the two trees, though they were quite a bit shorter in 1957, okay? But we know they're the same two trees because they're the rare Siamese twin trees where you get one trunk and two stems growing out of it. That's rare enough, but getting two of them side by side is extremely rare, you know? So those are the same trees. They're just a lot taller. So we kind of wondered, you see, this picture was taken in 1957. We were there in the early 2000s visiting the site, and the trees are a lot bigger. Where exactly was that house? So we took this picture, and it wasn't easy. It was pretty easy. All you had to do was line the mountains up. Even the snow patches looked pretty well the same after 51 years. Yeah. And we superimposed the house from the old 57 photograph and put it where it would be today. Matter of fact, those trees would be overgrowing it if it was still there today. And it wasn't too hard. It was quite easy. That's how we did it. Look at the snow here on that. Yeah. But like I said, you go there today, you won't find so much as a rusty nail. As a matter of fact, when I was there in 2001, that whole field was just crawling with tent caterpillars that were eating everything. So, yeah. We have local landmarks, but in British Columbia, see, Canadians, we are a little bit more laid back. One thing I noticed a difference between Sasquatch in Canada and Bigfoot in the United States is the attitude of the people. In America, Bigfoot's everywhere, you know. You get Bigfoot statues. Restaurants say, come in and have our Bigfoot burgers, have some Bigfoot pizza. You know, statues everywhere in California. People's here. There's a documentary on television tonight. It's about Bigfoot. That's interesting. I'm going to watch that. In Canada, quite often there's a special on the Sasquatch. That's interesting. But the hockey game's on. I'm watching that. So for many, many years, the Sasquatch Inn was the only local landmark on the Harrison area where I am that it would even remind you of this creature's presence. And the Harrison Hot Springs is probably the only community in all of Canada that's anywhere near what you have here in the Pacific Northwest United States, where you have, you know, like Willow Creek and all areas of California where Bigfoot statues all over the place. Right? As a matter of fact, I was so used to going by this place. I remember coming out of the old building and seeing the bats flying out of the wall. It was so, I really expected to find the place burned down one day, but they actually redid it, and I'm glad they did. So it'll be there. Well, the CHEHALIS First Nation, this is where the term Sasquatch was first coined. This is where the name comes from. They like to call themselves CHEHALIS, but everyone calls it the CHEHALIS people. And this is their First Nation symbol, obviously based on 352, the Patterson-Gimlin film. Another close classic stories from the CHEHALIS First Nation, Seraphine Long in 1871. As a young woman, she claimed a Sasquatch picked her up, covered her eyes with pitch, and carried her off the Morris Mountain, where it held her there for a very long period of time, impregnating her. But she begged and begged as her health failed and her pregnancy advanced, saying to the Sasquatch that was holding her, I want to see my people again before I die. And the story is the Sasquatch covered her eyes with pitch again, took her back and dropped her off where he picked her up. Lesson here, fellas, nagging works even on the Sasquatch. Right? And as the story is, a few months later, she gave birth to a malformed baby that soon died, and there was no more ever heard of the story. Now, this is one of the classic tales, of course. This is the only photograph taken of Seraphine. It was taken in 1938 when she was in her late 50s. As a matter of fact, I think she died about a month after this picture was taken. Wasn't that, Chris? Yeah, and it happened in 1871. Now, is the story true? Or is it a case of she was supposed to marry one young man in the community, was actually in love with another one, ran away with the other one, got knocked up by the other one, and then made this story up to cover up her infidelity? Who knows? You know, but that's the story. It's one of the classic tales of Seraphine Long. And that's Moore's Mountain. Yes, it is, Chris. It's nothing but a big hill. A lot of people keep thinking all the mountains in behind must be Moore's Mountain. No, that is Moore's Mountain. And in the old days, in the CHEHALIS Reserve, according to their folk history and old tradition, the Sasquatch are a tribe of hairy giants that they drove away in battle. And every now and then they come back. And once a year they would see the Sasquatch having fires on top of Moore's Mountain. And Moore's Mountain back in the turn of the century, well, turn of the 1800s to the 1900s, was basically where semi-civilization ended, and beyond it was nothing but total wilderness because there hadn't been any logging or anything in those days. So it was kind of like this was the gateway to the land of the Sasquatch back in the day. It's actually just nothing more than a big tree-covered hill, and there's actually a road, and you can drive right on it. J.W.BURNS, I was telling you about him a little while ago. He was very friendly with the First Nation people, but basically he was a spy for the Crown, for the government, keeping tabs on them. But he was very sympathetic with life on the reservations, and the people got to trust him, and they told him their stories. After a while, he actually filled in, even though he was never a qualified or licensed teacher, he taught at the local school. And many of the older folks in the CHEHALIS Nation today give him credit, saying they never would have gone to school if it weren't for J.W.BURNS, right? And J.W.BURNS got to know the people, and he heard their tales about this creature in the woods around called the Suskus, or Staskis. All depends on who you talk to on how they pronounced it. Or Saskahey, it's also been described as. And he wrote articles that appeared in Canadian publications. And this article appeared in Maclean's magazine April 1st, April Fool's Day. So you can basically tell how serious Maclean's took the subject, right? Maclean's magazine, 1929, entitled Introducing BC's Hairy Giants. And he wrote this article, and he took their name, Suskus, or Suskis, or how they ever pronounce it, and he mispronounced it and misspelt it, and he called it Sasquatch, and it's been known as Sasquatch in Canada ever since. And that's where the name came from, okay? All the other First Nation names up and down the coast slowly got drowned out, and everyone started using the term Sasquatch. Even some of the Caucasian names up and down the coast got drowned out and got replaced by Sasquatch. If you look at a lot of newspaper articles about this creature on Vancouver Island before 1929, you'll see the term Mowgli used a lot, like from the Jungle Book. But when Sasquatch got popular, all the others were forgotten through time. Now, you American folks, you came up with your name in 1958, Bigfoot, when Jerry Crew, road contractor, came down with these big casts. The press saw it, and they never heard of the Sasquatch in Canada. They didn't know what else to call it. The article was called Bigfoot Prints. The Associated Press put big and foot together. Bigfoot was born. So basically, Sasquatch is the Canadian name, Bigfoot's the American name for the same thing. That's how the names came about. Another classic tales, I call this my Three Amigos picture. My old buddy, the late Barry Blunt, Bill Miller, a guy we call One Year Ed. He used to be the curator of the museum in Hope. Has anyone ever heard the name JACKO associated with the Sasquatch? It is the one story, classic tale, in which a Sasquatch was allegedly captured. The story came out in the Victoria Times Colonist in 1884. What is it? And it told the story of a capture of a creature by railway workers just before Tunnel Number 4 outside the town of Yale, BC in 1884 when the gold rush was still going on. They had no idea what they were dealing with, okay? This is assuming the story is true. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The creature was examined by a doctor, Dr. Harrington, in town. The man existed. I've seen his notes. And I've seen parts of his journal. What I haven't seen is any mention at all from him that they ever looked at a thing they called JACKO in Yale, BC. And believe me, we spent a lot of time going through the archives over there. And there was always the possibility that the Victoria Times Colonist story was an early example of media tabloidism, right? Because they used to put tabloid stories in the paper to fill in space and stuff like that news. But papers never shared tabloid stories in those days. And it was not until the late 1990s that I found in the archives of the Calgary Museum an article from the Winnipeg Press, also 1884, also talking about the capture of a creature outside Yale, BC. So there was another paper in Canada telling the story. And since then, a couple of American friends of mine, one has shown me and sent me an email of a Colorado paper that talks about, dated 1884, talking about the capture of a strange creature outside Yale, BC. And you gotta remember, in 1884, Yale was it was a bad place. It was a bad place. It was a Wild West town. Anyone ever see that show on HBO called Deadwood? They could have called that Yale town, that would have fit right in. There wasn't a week went by without a gunfight or a stabbing or a murder. Half the buildings in town were saloons. Another third of them were brothels. It was a Wild West town, okay? A lot of the older folks back where I come from, like the late John Green and stuff, they like to think that the Canadian West was somehow more civilized, being part of the British Empire. You know, that somehow the Canadian West wasn't as wild. Nonsense. It was just as bad, and in many cases, it was worse, all right? The Northwest Mounted Police wouldn't go to Yale unless they had to, so the town had to hire its own police department and sheriff and stuff like that. And he was busy as you wouldn't believe. Hangings, shootings, murder. I mean, it was a that thing. So when something like this caught people's attention, it got noticed. So when the men approached Tunnel Number 4, which is right there, no one had ever been, as far as I knew, actually to the site of the JACKO capture, alleged JACKO capture. And this is Tunnel Number 4, outside of Yale. And the story is that they hit the brakes. It was a small train. It was a work train, just a smaller engine that's pulling a couple of flat cars and a boxcar or two with supplies in it. They saw this thing lying between the tracks and the cliff. They brought the train to a halt, blowing the whistle, and whatever it was woke up, okay? And it started climbing these cliffs. The men gave chase. And they started, if you go this way, it's actually an easier slope, and they actually got above him. And he sort of got trapped. I don't know if it was this ledge or this ledge, according to the story, or it could have been that one. And they started pelting the thing with rocks. They knocked him cold, apparently, according to the story. And they brought out rope, and they trusted him up, and they lowered him down, and they threw the poor thing into the boxcar. Brakes off. They used the old telegraph method to the radio in the town. The whole town was alert to what happened. Half the town was at the town train station to see this thing, but they never did because the train unloaded them at the railway yards outside of Tunnel Number 1. Okay? The doctor was sent for to see it. The men who captured him, they named him JACKO. He described him as 4 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 127 pounds, was completely covered from head to foot in hair, was rather ape-like in appearance, ate all vegetable matter that they gave him, drank milk with a passion, but he advised them, don't give him any meat because he was afraid it would make him vicious. And you got to remember, this is long before anybody other than First Nations even knew what a Sasquatch was. They had no idea what they were dealing with. So the men who captured him decided, we're going to take JACKO and we're going to put him on display in Europe in a carnival, you know, next to the Elephant Man and things like that, you know, and make our fortune. And that's what they're supposed to do. And this is where the story goes cold, because there's no mention of JACKO again anywhere in history, so we don't know what happened to him. Okay? It was a great opportunity. I wrote in the foreword that a little booklet Chris Murphy and the late Barry Blunt wrote about JACKO. I said it was a great chance to you know, solve a great mystery before a mystery became great, and it just didn't happen. Okay? It's really a pity. Really a pity, assuming the story's true. There were a couple of stories. Chief Quetzalcoatl said he saw JACKO being displayed in downtown Vancouver, yet I was never able to find any mention of that in the Vancouver press at the time. There's a story of the nunnery at Bishop's Cove. They said they got handed the creature. They shaved all his hair off and bathed him in scalding water, and he died. But there's no way of knowing if that story is ever true. We just don't know what happened, nor do we know if the story is actually true. But it is one of the classic British Columbia tales of the Sasquatch, the capture of JACKO. Oh, that's a close-up of tunnel number 4. Very shallow tunnel. You don't even know it's a tunnel until you're right on top of it. More modern stuff, or as I call it, file 149, ANDREA WRAY. Now, this lady, I went to interview her about what happened. John Green first told the story, the late John Green. He contacted me, and I went out, made arrangements to go out there the following day. She owns she lives in Half Moon Bay, and she owns her own store near Gibson's, and it was a store called Hot Tamales, which I assumed was a Mexican restaurant or something like that. Turned out to be an adult store for women. Yeah. And I remember going in here, my ever glad Rennie Hinden never saw me go into this place. But Mrs. Ray was coming home with her little girl. Her husband, who's in the photograph, was not present, so he was not a witness to this. Coming home, when she suddenly saw a creature in the edge of her headlights come out of across the highway right in front of her, the edge of her headlights, immediately walk in 3 paces and just disappear into the trees on the left-hand side. And she said it was funny. It's kind of like there was a streak and it was gone. And that always confused me. I didn't understand it. Remember, the streak, she didn't know what that meant. She saw it come out, cross, streak, and it was gone. So I went and took a look at the situation. That's her point to where it came out. And you can see the trail in the brambles there where something had come through. Cross the road. See, there's a close-up. You can see the trail where something had come through. And that's where it disappeared, on the other side. Well, the reason, and suddenly when I looked at that spot, it made sense. Why the streak? Because remember, she's looking at it at night in her headlights, right? There's actually a 9-foot drop here off the side of the road into those horrible blackberry bushes, right? It's like a 9-foot drop. You're literally almost stepping off a small cliff before you're in the trees. And it's only a kilometer from the coast here. And that made sense. She saw it, and it never even slowed down. It crossed 1, 2, 3, and went down. Disappeared. Into that mess. And that's where it disappeared. And when I was interviewing her, she actually broke down. She said, I've heard these stories my whole life, living where I do, and I just assumed they were utter nonsense. I'm just glad my little girl didn't see them, right? Well, guess what? A few years later, when we were thinking of doing a show, sort of like a Canadian version of Finding Bigfoot, which never got off the ground, we actually went and talked to her again. All of a sudden, this little girl said, Mommy, are you going to talk about the big monkey? And they go, what? That big monkey we saw that night when we were going home. She had seen it. She just hadn't said anything about it. So, yeah. And that's the way the story goes. By file 168, Lisa and her husband, Harry, fishing up a house in the Hope region for her parents to move into. And they just decided to take a break. It's early spring. The sun is out for the first time in weeks and weeks of rain. So they decided to head up Silver Saget Road to, you know, take in the air. They get to the 5 kilometer point. Oh, the road's blocked by a landslide again. Okay, and it quite often is in the springtime. The road gets blocked, so they had to turn around and head back. And when they got to the 4 kilometer point, she notices this figure disappearing into the trees on the right-hand side of the road. Disappears into a ditch. She tells her husband, he has no idea, but they pass the spot, and they pass an old trail, and he sees it come out onto the trail. And that's the spot where it happened. She saw this appear. And you can see how thick this stuff is, even in the springtime, before there's any leaves. Oh, by the way, that's her husband standing right there. Tell me, until I pointed him out, how many of you didn't see him? Yeah. That shows you how well things can blend in, even when they don't even try. I've had so many witnesses tell me over the years, and this fits into some of the talks you've heard today already. The witnesses said, if I hadn't looked right at it, I never would have known it was there. It was standing that still, right? They don't notice it until it moves, okay? And most of the times, they don't come out of the tree line to watch you in your campsite or something like that. They're 20 feet back in the shadows watching you, right? So we took a look around. We found these tracks. Track number 1. And this is in frozen ground. Remember, it's early spring, so it's still below 0. So the ground freezes, and it gets warm, it changes to rain, everything gets soft, something goes through, leaves tracks, it gets cold again, it all refreezes, right? That was track number 1. And a good example of what we call a mid-tarsal break in that track. Oh, that's a bottle cap that it stepped on. It was that somebody had left there. Yeah. Track number 2, 4.5 feet away from track number 1. Track number 3, 4 feet from track number 2. So a human can do that if he's running, right? But he usually doesn't run in the wintertime in frozen ground in bare feet. Another Bridal Falls Forest Service Road. This is just a Google map to show you where it is. Bridal Falls. The road goes up and goes all the way up Shem, and Bridal Falls disappears. It used to go right over into the next canyon, but it's been blocked off for years. 2008 was a very busy year for me. The first time, I've heard about this case in such an unusual way. Bella and her husband, who wishes to remain anonymous, and to this day wishes to remain anonymous, went up to a high view point up Bridal Falls Forest Service Road, you know, to do whatever couples do up there at night when they're looking at the lights of the Fraser Valley in the distance, feeling the distance, you know. At 2:30 in the morning, they're coming back down, solely in 4-wheel drive. Bella, unfortunately, never saw it, okay? She was fiddling with CDs or something, so she was looking down. All she remembers is her husband grabbed her arm, hit the brakes, and said, "Did you see that?" And she goes, "Well, what? What did you see?" "Naked hairy guy." You know. And he goes, "Well, no, what did you see?" He crossed the road, just, you know, 2 steps, and he was gone. It's a very narrow road. That's our Polaris Ranger that we like going in the bush with. That's a colleague of mine, Bill Miller, taking a look at the spot where it happened. And he moved forward a little bit, past the spot where it happened, and stopped right where the Bridal Falls Creek goes down. And he kept talking about it. And she finally clued in. She said, "Are you saying you saw a Sasquatch?" And his reply is, "No, there's no such thing as a Sasquatch. Doesn't exist. No way." No. As a matter of fact, to this day, he will not say it was a Sasquatch he saw. He said, "I have heard about them. I've hunted my whole life. I've been all over the mountains. I have no idea what I saw that night. It looks like a Sasquatch. It fits the description of the Sasquatch. But it couldn't have been a Sasquatch because there's no such thing as a Sasquatch. It's the same thing. That I found impressive because he will not say. As a matter of fact, he told his wife when they got home, tell nobody that this happened. Tell nobody. But she told her friend, who told another friend, whose husband worked at the mill where I live and remembered me and what I do. So I heard the story, and I called him the next day, and the first thing her husband said to me when he answered the phone is, how the hell did you hear about this? So I had to tell. I managed to convince him, calm down. I got in, managed to interview them both about what had happened, went to the site. You could see where something came out of there. The mountainside's like a 45-degree angle, right? That's Bill pointing to where it came out. You can see, and you can see through the thick bush on the other side where something or someone plowed through there at 2:30 in the morning. By the way, it was, let's see if I remember this correctly. Yeah, August 18th, 2008, okay? That's Bill pointing to where the spot. There were no clear, distinct footprints here, but you could see where something plowed through there, right? Now, these two reporters for the Chilliwack paper heard about the story, and so we kept the witnesses' story quiet. We kept their confidentiality, but we just told them. They published a story in the paper the next day called, If You Go Into the Woods Today. Well, this young man, Ryan KOZAK, BC File 161, he read that story and said to his mother, my God, I saw something on that same road later on that following evening. So he told her about it. He called the paper called us, and we went and interviewed him. And we interviewed him out at the spot where his sighting took place. And that's where it was. It was kind of comical. He said he saw this thing leaning against his feeder stump, and when his headlights came around the corner and on it, he said it was like a cartoon. Instead of going around the stump and disappearing down the hillside, it scrambled up and went over it. Its feet moving, he called it like a ninja you see on TV. Like panic. And you could see all the marks on the tree where something had gone up and through it. And if I had done that, I think I would have broken my neck. And while we were interviewing him, we realized you didn't see it the following evening. You saw it 10:30 p.m. the 18th, the night before. Midnight comes around. It's now the 19th when our first story happened, right? So he actually saw it 4.5 hours before. So we got two reports from two different people who didn't know each other, 4.5 hours apart, less than a kilometer apart on the same stretch of road. One that's going up the mountain, the other that's going down. It's a fair bet, if the stories are true, they both saw the same creature. Can't say that with 100% certainty, but that's what I think. They probably saw the same creature. That's Bill and them, Bill looking at the stump. It's a feeder stump, so that means there's another tree going out of it. So it's been there quite a while. Mark QUARTON, BC File 162, the bear hunter incident. He was out hunting bear early in the morning, walking along this road, 2008. Look how thick bush it is. He's hunting black bear right there, gets to this spot right here, and he just sees out of the corner of his eye a large rock coming towards him, spiraling. The rock misses him. It splashes into this bog. Well, the next one, that's the spot where it hit. Splashing him with smelly water. It's a bog, it's a swamp, it stinks, it's horrible. We were in there trying to find the rock. Yeah. He says it splashed him, and all he saw was the head and shoulders of something going around along the tree line around this bog. It would take a few steps, stop. Look what he was doing. Take a few steps more, stop. Take a few steps more, stop. Mike QUARTON is 6'4". He was dressed in camouflage, carrying a 30-06 high-powered rifle with a scope. He said, I don't know about you, but I would not throw rocks at a man like that. You know? But whoever this was did. And he went looking. He said, we found an area where it looked like all the stuff had been flattened, but we never found anything like tracks or anything. Well, Miller and I and another researcher who accompanied us did, and we found these tracks. That's track number one. You can't see it very well. Can you see the toes along there and the heel? The next one's better. Yeah, can you see that? Yes. Yeah, they're toe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And remember, these are tracks in bog debris, not dirt. Layers and layers of rotting leaves, sticks, gunk, you name it, right? Next one. A little close up. Can you actually see that all right? Yeah. Big toe, next toe, next toe, next toe, next toe. Heel. That proves that someone or something was there when he said it happened, at least in my opinion. Okay? And another one. Oh, that one's a little better. You can see all the clear toes there. Close up of the toes. Me coming out with the cast after I cast the track. We had to do it. We couldn't wait any longer because the weather was going to turn real bad and it was going to downpour rain for another 3 days, so we decided to cast it and bring it back out. Kevin Francis, file number 167. He's actually a host of a radio show in the Lower Mainland called Left of the Valley. But when he was coming home early one night in September of 2008, he was passing this piece of property, and he's standing where he said they saw the thing, 2:30 in the morning, patches of fog here and there, kind of creepy. He sees this large, hairy thing standing on the side of the road. He passes it. Never really reacted. He just sort of... His driveway is only 2 houses down, and then he stops it. What the hell was that? And, you know, that was the one basically was. And there's the property, and it's kind of a joke because if you look at the sign over the property, it says Bigfoot. It's now an airsoft game called the Bigfoot Field, where, you know, where they have those war games, things like that, right? So I went to the owner, I asked him, do you have any gorilla costumes, and do you do any, like, games where you hunt monsters and stuff like that? He just smiled at me. He wouldn't say anything. But I heard from reliable sources that, yeah, they do have 2 gorilla costumes, right? Now, whether he was out there at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to freak out someone on the road, I don't know. That's what the guy said. This lady, Barb Norris, 164, not too far from the board, said she saw one walking down this road and disappeared off to the right. That's my old vehicle there that I nearly got killed in. Right there. Now, it is a neighborhood and stuff. There are houses, but there's a lot of woods in between. And this is just above the American border at the location where 800th Street hits 20th Avenue, right? This is, she did a sketch for it, and she said this is what she saw. It was big, shaggy, hairy, and was walking away from me. And that's all she, I'm not saying it was a Sasquatch. As far as she's concerned, it could be a guy. And she said, and she described it as one of those old rah-rah coats that they used to wear in the old football games back, you know, and that's what she was thinking at the time. Yeah. Ooh. Vera, kid, went outside, couldn't understand why the neighbor's dog was barking. Said she saw this figure standing right behind this tree near the tire swing looking at her. She got close enough to it, she said she thought she could see a wound in its lip. And it just stared at her for a few moments before it slowly turned and walked away. Dogs didn't seem to bother it. Her presence didn't seem to bother it. Walked away. That's the community hall in DeRoche where this happened. The thing walked along the track and disappeared into the trees along conveniently named Crazy Creek. Nobody saw it except for her. And I thought that's very strange. And then I went up and down there and checked it out, and I noticed nobody saw me. So it's possible, right? Marvin Stryker, we call him Monkey Man. Never got above grade, left school very young, grade 5 to take care of his ailing mother. Worked hard all his whole life. Was driving up the west side of Harris Lane, 12-kilometer point. He sees what he says calls a monkey running across the road around a big bend in the road, right there. Bill Miller's standing where he saw it. He's coming down this way, turns around, it's like a big turn. Been by it. He says it came out and just ran across the road, and he called it a monkey. And we said, you know, you've known us for years. You know what you do. How come you never told us about this? He said, because someone just threw out a darn monkey. And so we questioned him, well, what, did it have a tail? No. Did it have this? No. And finally Bill said, Marvin, why do you not think it was a Sasquatch? He said, well, it wasn't 8 feet tall. It was only this high. And he goes, Marvin, do you think polar bears are 800-pound killing machines at birth? They're little floaty flirtings. You can put them in your coat pocket, you know. They're born cute and small. And it's like a light bulb went on his head. The idea of it being a Sasquatch because of its size just never occurred to him. Never occurred to him. And it don't matter. You have to remember that to him, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a gorilla, orangutan, or a little spider monkey. It's all monkey to him, you know, so he called him monkey. This gentleman, Mr. Barnett, 186, driving south of Pitt Lake. These are all recent incidents, right? South of Pitt Lake. He assumed it was a security guard he was looking at in some sort of dark coverall uniform on the road because there had been a movie filming in that general area the week before, and they had left phony police cars out there, you know, and stuff, where they're filming their action scene in the bush. I don't know the story, the cops have a gunfight there or something like that. And he thought they were still there until he realized there was nothing there anymore. And this thing just seemed to cross the road, go through two extremely deep ditches. And if you've ever seen the roadside ditches in British Columbia, you can drown in them, right? That's my car in position. That's where he was. And I took the camera shot about where he said it crossed the road. And again, we get where something went through the grass, something big, you know, and disappeared. These people just making up. He didn't say it was a Sasquatch either. That's what I like. They don't claim they saw a Sasquatch. I like it when they basically tell me something, describe it, and they let me draw the conclusions of what it might have been, okay? And even like I told you, I got some witnesses that don't even want to say it was a Sasquatch. They still won't say it was a Sasquatch. Now, to me, that's impressive. The biggest problem with shows like Finding Bigfoot today and stuff, it's made seeing a Sasquatch trendy, you know. And I've had people call me up, telling me these incredible stories, hoping I'll refer to them to the show because they want to be on the show, right? That's just a big red flag to me. Yeah. Most recent one, just January 2017. Well, you can't see that track very well, but that one shows up a little better. On the outskirts of conveniently named Sasquatch Provincial Park in British Columbia. This is a case that annoys me to no end because the witnesses in this case should have been some of the best I ever heard from. You ever heard the name John Kirk? He's the head and president of the BCSCC. That's the British Columbia Scientific Cryptozoological Club. I dare you to say that 5 times fast. All right? They look into everything, lake monsters, sea serpents, Sasquatch, right? They were out on the Harrison Lake, stopped at the entrance to Sasquatch Park, waiting for people to catch up to them. And the people that they were waiting for were 2 American friends who were paying a visit, researchers, Kenneth Jarowski from Maryland, and a David Winter, who's from Washington. I was kind of hoping he'd be here tonight. Yeah. And a third member, a Canadian, who was Zach Zarrison from the BFRO, who was to join them. And while they were waiting, Winona Kirk, John's wife, saw a figure moving up in the trees. It was in shadow. It was dark. And this is like 4:30 in January. It gets dark early in the winter up in Canada, right? They just see this tall figure up there. It's not impossible. It couldn't have been a man up there. There is a pullout where some people unload their ATVs. The government doesn't supply washroom, so a lot of people have a habit of going in behind the big trees to do their business, right? Have no idea. But something was moving up there, and they were all looking at it. And this is where the story gets interesting, because they kind of contradicted each other in what they told me. They told me that Jack Zachariason never saw the thing. He arrived just after it happened. But Jason Zachariason told me, no, he did see it. But he says he can't say it was a Sasquatch. It was a big figure. He doesn't know what it was. But we did go there a couple of days later with myself, and we did find these tracks, and we cast them. That step was 6 feet. I tend to wonder if it was a stride, and maybe it touched here and came down, but we don't know. But we did cast 2 of them. Oop, went too far. Oh, I seem to be missing a picture there. But you know, we have I see wolf tracks all the time. We got them. Mountain lion tracks. These appeared right in our tires. It was following us. Yeah. But I never saw the cat. And so what did Bill do after we found the mountain lion was following us? He decided to go off, start a fire, and start cooking hot dogs. Yeah, not smart. Big cat there. You can see the width of the tire. Black bear tracks, see them all the time. Grizzly bear tracks, we still got a healthy grizzly population up there. Harrison Lake, this area, you know, you go up there at night, you won't see a single porch light anywhere. There's nobody. Nobody. Some people say in BC, like Chris was saying this morning, that there's areas where people have never stood. Yeah, I guess that is true. But I think a more accurate description was, if you're a person standing on that ridge or on that shoreline, you're probably the first person to stand that spot in 30 years. And there may not be somebody else for another 20, you know. That's British Columbia. The bad possibility of a large primate living in there, going undetected or undiscovered, totally possible. I can't see any reason why not. Okay. The slide that came down CHEHALIS Lake and caused a tsunami to go down the lake, just had a recent report from there this year. But it used to be a great circle. Well, they don't plan on opening that road again because the mountain's unstable. That's the kind of thing you have to deal with when you live in mountain country. Every now and then the roads get taken out. Every now and then the mountains come down. You know, close above it. Long history of reports around there. Sunshine Valley, British Columbia, beautiful place. You'll never forget it. And I think my time is pretty well up, so I was wondering if anyone has any questions. Yes, sir.
You've debunked a lot of these stories.
A lot of hoaxing attempts, yeah.
So what's kind of like some of the common elements of the stories that you've debunked that, you know,
well,
the signs and what tells you that it's
when someone sees something a mile away, but they give such detail as though he was standing this close, you know, that's a red flag, okay? Someone who comes out, in 40 years of research, I may have had a fleeting glimpse of an actual Sasquatch once. But I won't say so because I have a philosophy I have used my whole time doing this. Stick to the facts, never deviate the facts. I saw a figure. He was a mile away, almost. He appeared to be walking upright. He was jet black in color. But the facts also are, I couldn't see any detail. He was too far away, you know. I can't say with 100%, or it wasn't a big odd man way up there. If he was huge. Matter of fact, this figure, the way I remember it, he was big even for a Sasquatch. But I don't know. If that was a Sasquatch, I saw one. If it wasn't, I still have not. And yet you get somebody like that who gives such detail like they're standing right beside it. A researcher who claims 15 sightings in the last 2 years. In 40 years, I've seen maybe one once. Seen tracks about 8, 9 times. Investigated hundreds of reports. But someone can't go out his back door without encountering Sasquatch. There's a problem. Yeah, there's something. And I got to tell you, the biggest problem with this research today is the people who call themselves researchers. Okay? There are a lot of good ones. A lot of good researchers. A number of them are here tonight. You've heard them speak today, but there are a lot more bad ones. People suffering what I politely call Ivan Marks syndrome, if you don't know who that is. Ivan Marks was the first example of this I know. Someone who may have found something authentic once, was the center of attention for a while, and when that attention dies down, they find the attention was more important than the research itself, so they start making things up to remain the center of attention. The biggest example of that, in my humble opinion today, is one Todd Standing. I personally don't believe a word the man says. He counters Sasquatch all the time. Just ask him. He's Superman. You know, any more? Yeah, right.
Yeah, when JACKO, according to JACKO again, is they still using the same track? Do the railroads still use that trackway?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, mate. Yeah, railway line. Yeah, the same railway line. It's still in use today. It used to be the old wagon road, which was considered a wonder of the world at the time. It was the only way in and out. And they built the Trans-Canada Railway on top of it, okay? And in 1884, there was still a big gap. It was 1 year away from completion. So the only way to get JACKO out of here was go to Vancouver and take him out by ship or cross the border to the American Transcontinental Railway, which was complete.
How far was that from Vancouver?
From Vancouver? About 60 miles or so. It's about 20 miles from Hope. It's only about 5 miles from Yale. Yeah. And it's still in use today. There's a line on the other side of the river now, too, but in 1884, that didn't exist. And the Trans-Canada Highway is about 100 feet above it. Of course, in 1884, that didn't exist. And believe me, if you walked that road, that route, back in those days, you took your life in your hands. Anything else? Sir?
Thanks for your presentation today.
Yeah.
I did have one other question, and you didn't really address this in your discussion, but in any of the research that you've done, do they describe the smell of the
oh, yes.
creature?
As a matter of fact, smell is described, I find, maybe 1 in every 10 incidents, okay? Make any mention. A lot of the older books give you the impression this thing sinks to high heaven all the time. I find that maybe 1 in 10 reports mention any smell at all, and it's usually smell in the area after the thing had moved off. So I think it may be a glandular thing it does when it's feeling stressed. And people detect it. I mean, orangutans do this. And the mountain gorilla is known to do this, especially the males, right? They give off this odor, okay? But most, 90% of the time, no, there's no mention of smell at all. I imagine it doesn't smell any worse than any other large hair-covered creature that's walked through a river in 48 hours. Yeah. Sir?
How many stories you've gotten that cannot debunk?
Huh?
How many stories have you gotten that you cannot debunk?
You mean on that presentation?
No, that you believe are true.
Oh, yes, I believe about half the ones I've been told. Yeah, I think there is a large pyramid. I think the Sasquatch exists. The problem with hoaxing, it's getting to epidemic proportions, and all the researchers you've done would say the same thing. They probably hear from people just like I do, people claiming the wildest things. Yeah. And it happens over and over again. And it's gotten worse, not better. It's getting far worse. The internet, great tools it is in some ways the worst thing that ever happened to this research because it's a soapbox for every snake oil salesman out there. It really is. And if you do your homework and don't overdo it, you can make up a story and sound completely convincing. But I notice that a lot of the times they still make the same mistakes. They can't stop themselves. And they just go overboard, you know? So the red flags go off. And that's just the way it is, right? People love telling stories. People like telling monster stories. And in the Sasquatch field, it's no different than I imagine. I used to say with pride back when I started, at least we're not as bad as the UFO field. But we are now. We are. We really are. Anyone else? Thank you, folks. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoyed the museum and pay it a visit, okay?